Welcome back to the channel. This tactical intellectual channel, we're about to kick off a new series entitled The Near East and Southwest Asia. Every video presentation will be a part whatever of this series. So part 1 will be centered on Mesopotamia, that's Sumer, Assyria, Akkad, Babylon, and we're going to just show and prove, because I'm making a claim that the original people, the people who seeded and started these civilizations, were melanated people. So I'm gonna, of course, break out my source materials, read a little bit, and then move on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start this episode here. So before I start, there's a disclaimer. The end of this video will not conclude with the final thought of, well, extraterrestrial people did indeed come in and settle everything and establish everything. Nah, that's the Stankagian crowd there. They don't know anything. They don't understand or comprehend what they're looking at, so they just make up some stuff going off their imagination. They just let their imagination run wild. Not happening here. We're built on facts and evidence, man. So let's go ahead and get into it. Just going off the top of my head, when I think of this Mesopotamian area, I definitely think of a mixture and interchange of culture, speech, customs, traditions, and Mesopotamia to me is like the urbanized form of that space right there. Whereas when you look at the Arabian Peninsula, that's more of the rural, maybe suburban parts, but the people are all similar. It's a lot of cultural interchange going on from East Africa really all the way to maybe India, to be honest with you. But that the ground zeros of culture is in Mesopotamia: Sumer, Akkad, Syria, Assyria, all of that. So I mean, Babylon, of course, we know that Shinar was the place right there, and the people who made it up, well, like I say, it's a mix. And I definitely go to the Torah or Bible or those Abrahamic religious sources, because they do have the records of the bloodlines there, and we know what lands they settled in. So I mean, it's a lot of Hamitic, Shemitic people going back and forth and mixing, mingling, and just sharing their cultures and languages with one another. Keep in mind that the Sumerians were Hamitic, Amitic, or Hamitic, however you want to say it. Okay, so the overall point was that they were Hamitic, then they also came through Cush's line, so they were Cushitic also. So I mean, we already know that the main branch of the Cushitic peoples, I mean, they splintered off, and then of course they created their own. So what the record is, Nimrod created civilizations in Mesopotamia, so they became their own thing. Sumerian, Akkad, Akkadian. We don't even know what Akkad was bloodline wise. Could have been Shemitic, no doubt. But here we go. Let's go back to the main point. I don't want to stray too far, but that mixture and interchange, you don't think that Cushitic people were going to Mesopotamia, and in turn the Shemitic people were already in the area? You don't think that? I mean, yeah, that happened. So how can I know? Well, let's go ahead and go to the sources with that. Let's go check out the racial history of man and just see the skeletal remains. So we're on page 251, chapter 1 of the Southern Peninsulas, chapter Arabia, Palestine, Syria, and Mesopotamia. The highlighted portion, first sentence reads, in Babylonia, in the region about the head of the Persian Gulf, a great civilization grew up, whose beginnings go back certainly to the early part of the 4th millennium BC, and which rivaled that of Egypt in character and antiquity. Alright, stop there. Page 252, the highlighted portion reads, of the physical characteristics of the Sumerians, among whom developed the parent civilization of the Tigris-Euphrates region. Drop down. Hami or Hami has endeavored to show that on the basis of sculptured heads and bas reliefs, the ancient non-Semitic Sumerians were brachycephalic, whereas the Semitic or Shemitic speaking peoples, who already at the earliest known historical period were acquiring dominance in Babylonia, were on the contrary dolichocephalic. We have reason to believe that the Sumerians were an immigrant people in Babylonia, having come from the borders at least of the Iranian plateau, where the ancient population was almost certainly brachycephalic, so that Hami's result accord at least with all that we know or can conjecture of the racial history of this region, that all of the Semitic or Shemitic speaking folk here were, on the other hand, dolichocephalic, may be doubted, since it is very probable that Alpine or Palealpine influences had before this made themselves felt in southern Arabia, derived doubtless from the Iranian plateau, whence the Sumerians themselves somewhat later came. Let's drop down a little bit. From Palmyra in the Syrian desert, we have a half dozen skulls dating from about the beginning of the Christian era, which, like the earlier ones from Babylon, show the predominance of dolichocephalic, probably Mediterranean factors. This prevalent long-headedness is also stated to be true of the great series of ancient Hebrew crania excavated by the Palestine Exploration Fund, no study of which, however, has yet been published. It is also true of various small series of crania of considerable, although uncertain age, coming from northern Arabia and Palestine. So let's drop down on page 253. It says the modern population of the whole area is in the main of Shemitic speech and may be conveniently divided into two groups: the sedentary agricultural peasantry, or fellahin, and the city dwellers, and the nomadic or semi-nomadic Bedouin. So we're going to skip over to page 255, and it reads, "We must probably seek its sources in the Iranian plateau, whence it may have crossed the Persian Gulf to Oman and spread thence along the coasts. As to the period of its coming, we know nothing except that from the African evidence it could hardly have come very early, and the conjecture may be hazarded that the movement of Alpine and Palealpine peoples into southern Arabia was perhaps in part due to the invasion of the Iranian plateau in the second millennium BC by Indo-European Cassets, who conquered Babylonia at this period, and the ancestors of the later Hindus. It is also to be noted that there is clearly some Negroid mixture in the population of the southern coastal districts of Arabia. Whether this is to be attributed to the influence of African slaves, either recently or as far back as the period of the Sabian and Menaian kingdoms, or is evidence of the very ancient stratum of Negroid peoples, connecting those of Africa with those formerly living on the northern shores of the Persian Gulf and still dominant throughout all southern India. It is, in the absence of adequate data, impossible to say. In stature, the modern population of the whole area seems to grade from short in the south to taller in the north. The southern Arabs from Muscat around to Yemen are slightly under medium height, the shortest being the round-headed Shahar Bedouin, who average only about 161 centimeters. In the Hejaz and among the Bedouin of Sinai, the stature is slightly over medium, culminating in the Fellahin of Samaria with an average stature of 174 centimeters, only to decrease again somewhat among the people of northern Syria. In pigmentation, the whole population is everywhere strongly brunette, and is only in parts of northern Syria that a small proportion of blonde types appears, an Arab of the northern or dolichocephalic type. So let's go ahead and move on to the book, The Negro in the New World, by Sir Harry H. Johnston. Page 27, starting at that orange highlighted portion, and it reads, "The Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair, and to have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians. There is a curliness of the hair, together with a Negro eye and full lips, in the portraiture of Assyria, which conveys the idea of an evident Negro element in Babylonia. Quite probably, the very ancient Negro invasion of Mediterranean Europe came from Syria and Asia Minor on its way to Central and Western Europe." Now on page 251, in regards to Babylonia and that region there of Mesopotamia, we see that the Sabian people or Sabian people, they are indeed Negro Aboriginal people of that area. On 252, we have mention of the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, and we know that Sumer and the Sumerians in general, they were Hamitic Negro Aboriginal people. So they do tell of them speaking a Shemitic language, but I mean the original Shemitic people were aboriginal to this planet too, so that means that they were Negro people, whether curly hair, straight hair, or coarse hair. I mean, you pick. The goal of this channel was to pull apart the distortions caused by biases of a certain time period. Those who were writing the books and flooding the scholastic arena with all of their biased writings and stuff. I mean, this is how they see things, but you know, we have to see what is actually legitimate when it comes to facts, evidence, and putting things in the proper context. So let's go ahead and go to the Negro in the New World. We already read that, but just think about what it's saying. It's saying that the Elamites of Mesopotamia, they basically had these Negro traits that was passed on to, I guess, all of the Babylonians, because the Babylonians, the Syrians, the Assyrians, and they went up to Europe and passed those traits on. That's heavy right there. You don't let that go over your head. Just notice what you're looking at. Notice what is being told to you in these sources right here. They were actually telling the truth when this guy wrote this here. He has the picture, the visual. We know that our eyes are not telling lies, and I mean, we can trust our eyes. So when you see that visual right there, just know that these types of people, they passed their traits on. They hadn't even went through any type of mutation yet, but they passed their traits on to the Mediterranean people, and they went all up into Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe. So do not let that fact dissolve into nothingness. We know that people who had biases, I have to reiterate this time and again, the people back then in the 1800s to now, I mean, we're seeing the residuals of those biased writings. And I mean, these people, they put their personal feelings over facts. So we're in this mess right now, but we have to untangle the knots. So let's go ahead and move forward and find information that supports and reinforces the overall, which is the theme of the Aboriginal people of Mesopotamia of the greater Near Eastern regional area. Now we look to the book Sex and Race, Volume 1, Negro Caucasian Mixing in All Ages and All Lands by JA Rodgers. The first chapter we look into is chapter 3, the mixing of white and black in the ancient East. Let's read what that says there. The great areas of race mixing in the ancient world were both shores of the Mediterranean, Asia Minor, and Arabia, all the territory bordering on the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Let's stop right there. We move on to chapter 4, Syria, Palestine, Arabia, Persia. It says, the Near East was the scene of another vast amalgamation of black and white, evidences of which are offered by both mythology and archaeology. According to Greek mythology, which is a sort of shadowy history, the ancestor of the Persians was Perseus, the son of the Greek Perseus, and Andromeda, daughter of Cephas, king of Ethiopia. And I'm going to stop right there. That is a little foreshadowing. I'm going to get into the mythology of everything in later on installments of this series here. Now, this platform is not about me sitting here bloviating, trying to impress people. I let the facts speak for itself. I want to be short and specific and straight to the point. Now, things should be coming together, but this is my only addition here. It mentions that a mixture and amalgamation took place. Well, I mean, to have an amalgamation, you need a little bit of this element here, a little bit of that element here, and a little bit of this element right here to create a new element. And I definitely wanted to mention briefly the mythology of it all, because that mythology is a snapshot, little sample of the life that they were living back then. I mean, of course they have the fantasy added on, but I mean, that fantasy is not going to go full blown crazy. It's going to have a little bit of reality of the times that they were living in. So I say this just to point that out. So question for the viewer, is that all that I have? Answer, no. Do I have more information? Sure I do. Let's go ahead and view it. What do we have? What's our source that we're going to look at next? We're now going into the book Environment, Race, and Migration by Griffith Taylor. We're going to check out chapter 16, starting on page 202. The bottom portion in the orange highlight, it reads, Kroeber, however, assigns all the straight-haired peoples of Central Asia to the Caucasian, while Ripley links Alpines and Mongols in his chart of hair distribution. You know what? We're going to talk about these people later. It's not even about them right now. It's about the original people who are melanated Negro swarthy folks. Now, hey, let's go ahead and jump over to page 212. The highlighted portion on section D, races of Southwest Asia. The highlighted portion, of course, and it says, we find much the same order in the zones of folk in Arabia, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Turkestan. All around the borders of the Indian Ocean, there seems to be relics of a Negroid or Negrito stratum. Hussings suggests a race of Negritos as the most ancient population of the coasts between India and the Persian Gulf. He thinks that elements of a Dravidian population are found in the interior of Persia. Duolafwa found Negrito or Negro people near Susa in southwest Persia. While no Negroes survive in Syria, there are many skulls being found in the caves hereabouts, which may well indicate the presence of an early Negroid zone. Ruggieri suggests that the Brakav Arabs of Yemen differ from Arabs of Muscat, owing to some of this Negrito blood, which is also shown by their lower stature and curly hair. That's very telling, because it's saying that Duolafwa found Negrito or Negro people near Susa, which is southwest Persia. And then it's even saying that, all right, there's no Negro people that survive in Syria presently today, but their skulls are found all over the place. So that signifies that there was a large presence of Negro peoples. The exact language being used is this: the presence of an early Negroid zone. Now, we have to start making sense of all of this stuff. We know that a lot of migrations happen, and I know today they want to use DNA evidence and everything, but it's time period wise. All right, so looking at what Ruggieri suggested about the Braka Arabs of Yemen, we know that going back to the fact that there's an early Negroid zone, so now you start to overlay different types of people on top of that zone right there. In other words, you have to acknowledge the original peoples that were found in abundance at one point in time. Then you have to start to acknowledge the amalgamations that has happened throughout the years. That's why we get to what we have presently when it comes to the racial makeup of the people. The people that you see presently, it did not start off like that. So you just have to acknowledge that. And the proof is in the skulls and the skeletal remains that have been found. So we could move on from this part right here. So we're in the final thoughts portion of this video presentation. I don't really have too much to add, and I don't really want to elaborate too much because I do that in other video presentations that will come on down the line. So the original people, we know that they were Negro people. They seeded the population. You may not see them presently in our day, but I mean, the evidence, the skeletal remains, the skulls found, and you know, even the culture. I mean, it's watered down now, but that just tells you that, all right, you had a group of people and then you overlaid other types of people onto that original population. So it's kind of like having a drink. Let's say you have Coca-Cola. You pour Coca-Cola in a gallon jug halfway, and then you add some more, some Sprite to it, then some Minute Maid orange juice or whatever, then a little bit of alcohol in it. But then again, this is the main point right here. You can still taste that Coca-Cola flavor, and you know that's Coca-Cola. You can still see the color of Coca-Cola, even though it's kind of watered down. You know it's Coca-Cola. I mean, it's there. Then that same Coca-Cola aftertaste is there. Same with humans, man. You can see the same thing right here. You can tell that these people just still had that originality to them, even though they had amalgamated previously. And I mean, you get what you have today because of that simple concept. Now, I want to veer off and speak about something that seems to have a lot of people confused in our present day. This is the concept of the Middle East, or the usage of the Middle East. Now, I'm sure you noticed that I used the Near East instead of Middle East, but let me just go into the history and put things in add more context as to why some people use Middle East and why I choose not to use Middle East as a term. I'm aware that the term Middle East is a fairly young term in the grand scheme of things. So here's a video clip that just puts everything in context, and it brings facts and evidence. So let's check it out.
What do you mean Middle East? Is there an Upper East, a Lower East? What do you mean Middle East? It's a geopolitical term that the British, our good friends the British, that they used during their reign and their dominion, which has long since passed. The sun has long set on the British Empire. They no longer rule the seven seas, but they, in their world, in their worldview, they called this region the Middle East. And it made sense in that perspective, because going to their east, when they got as far as they could to their east, and they call that the Far East. And to this day, it's still called the Philippines, China, Asia, or Far East Asia, whatever. So when you look at going to those regions and passing through this region, passing through Syria, passing through Israel, passing through Egypt, passing through Afghanistan, Iran, etc., it made sense according to their worldview to call this the Middle East. It was the middle of their East. But no longer will a geopolitical term suffice for what we're saying is geological and geographical truth.
Europeans classified this area as a Middle East. And then since this the Middle East, the other question, where the Middle West? Where the Middle North and where the Middle South? They don't have no geographical terms like that. And the only reason why they use that term, Middle East, because it disconnects the proper connotation that should go with describing this land geographically.
All right, so check out this Washington Post article entitled "How the Middle East Was Invented." The link to this article will be in the description. I'm not gonna read everything, just highlight the important parts. Yeah, basically it's telling you how this term came to be in existence. Down below it says that the region we recognize as the Middle East today, a roughly defined but distinct swath of territory stretching from Turkey to Egypt to Iran only came into being with the end of the Ottoman Empire and the disappearance of the older, now antiquated sounding Near East. Alright, so before the start of World War I, the Brits, they already mentally divided the world. That portion of the world, they already considered the Near East nearer than the Middle East, and the Middle East was, to them, the middle of the Near East and Far East. So, that was a geopolitical term. It was one that the British colonial administrators used. And so we see that for several decades, that new usage remained confined to obscure branches of the British government. And it was that usage that spread throughout the English-speaking world during the World War II period. So people started reading newspapers about what was going on militarily in the area. And then, the people in the U.S., they gotta hop on to what the Brits are doing. So they took that interest in that region, and then they started, adopting that term right there. And here we are today. Nobody was using Middle East before that, and they certainly wasn't using Middle East in antiquity. So that kind of trips us up today, because we be superimposing our own usages and terms to what they did back then. Like, you'll probably see a modern movie today, and then they got the people that's the antique culture is talking about Middle East. It's just foolishness, man. Don't get caught up like that. Yeah, basically, now I'm definitely not trying to police people in what they use. You can use whatever you want. We're all grown here. But my thing is, just be aware of what was being used at certain points in time. Yeah, because different cultures, different peoples, they refer to that region, under different terms. So it's not Middle East. So the next time you're watching a modern movie and, the setting is somewhere in Scandinavia and these Vikings speaking with British accents talking about going on expeditions to the Middle East, you don't just buy everything hook, line, and sinker. So that's the end of this presentation here. Part 2 of this series will come next week, and I'm definitely going to elaborate more in different presentations. So it's a whole series, so you're going to have to put everything together when I conclude with the series. All right, guys, take care.